This Innovation in Science Advice studio session, Beyond the Current Affairs, Building Capacity for Using Scientific Knowledge in Policymaking, is presented by the Canada Foundation of Innovation. Please welcome our moderator, Dr. Mehrdad Hariri, CEO and President of the Canadian Science Policy Centre.
Hello again, my name is Mehrdad Hariri, the CEO of Canadian Science Policy Centre, and I have the pleasure of being with you on day 3 of the biannual INGSA Conference 2021. On day 3 of presentations, we explore various topics from theory to practice of the use of evidence in policymaking and building capacity in this field. On theory side, we go beyond the current affairs and discuss fundamental questions on how humanity can face wicked challenges. Is there any other solution than science to deal with these challenges? And for science, in order to be effective and to make change, it needs to be intertwined with policy, and how. To explore an example of how knowledge brokers within academic institutes are key to unlocking critical scientific findings that can contribute valuable insights to the wicked problems, we hear from Water Security National Alliance in Canada and their contribution to this notion of science intertwined with policy, the real tangible barriers that hinder the limits of the engagement of academics in the complicated policy-making process. And we take deep dive into one of the most interesting and hot topics, science and democracy. Are we in the world in which power shapes truth as much as truth speaks to power? And how to produce policy-relevant knowledge in a way that is harmonious with democratic principles of legitimacy and accountability. But as much as these discussions are valuable, the analysis of real examples of those who dare to expand the frontier of knowledge and reach out to policy is important. We hear about SETI, a project across Uganda, Ghana, and Pakistan, and their approach on capacity development to see capacity in the context of each country. And they refer to it, as they refer to it, to listen, learn, connect, and adopt approach to the realities on the ground. Also, we hear from colleagues in Sri Lanka who have proposed a system to generate robust scientific evidence, a system that interlinks the existing silo systems of state institutions and corporations in Sri Lanka and bring them into a common platform to be explored within a framework. STI data platform, which effectively collects data from across the sectors, analyze and disseminate the data among the practitioners at the interface of science and policy. And we hear about the capacity building in Mexico, where for the first time, science policy interface fellowships have been established and young scientists learn to work at this interface. All these endeavors are expanding the frontiers of theory and building capacity for future generation at the intersection of science and policy. All interesting discussions that cannot be missed.
Hello, welcome. I'm pleased to join you today through INGSA 2021. I'm Nancy Goucher, and I'm a knowledge mobilization specialist at the University of Waterloo's Water Institute. And today I want to talk to you about how knowledge brokers within academic institutions can be key to unlocking scientific findings that can contribute valuable insights to wicked problems. I work on what is arguably one of the world's greatest wicked problems, protecting water resources in the face of climate change. Wicked problems are seemingly intractable, problems that defy simple solutions and have far-reaching impacts for people. I work with one of the world's largest water research programs called Global Water Futures. It's a $78 million program that supports 50 projects across Canada dealing with various aspects of this water climate change problem. So for example, we're looking at how agriculture can adapt to changing rainfall patterns, how to improve water monitoring with tools like drones, and how to reduce our footprint on lakes by changing what we're doing on the land. But what's neat about Global Water Futures is that they've decided to invest heavily in knowledge mobilization, because none of this research means very much if the people making decisions don't know about it. Our knowledge mobilization strategy goes beyond dissemination of research. We recognize that research needs to be based in reality. Not only do we need to understand the science, but we also need to know things like who's in charge, what solutions have already been tried, what's the appetite for change? Because if you don't fully understand the context within which you're researching, you will usually have a harder time convincing people to follow your recommendations. Despite knowing this, it's often easier said than done. So what are the barriers for academics trying to engage with policymakers? Well, one such barrier is timing. When an urgent issue arises and science doesn't already have an answer, it can be pretty tough for researchers to provide timely input. And that's because they have to apply for grants and hire students and teach them and do the research and write up the results and get that published. By that time, policymakers have often long had to offer their input into the best course of action. A second barrier is that academics sometimes fail to fully understand the policy process. When you don't work in that world, it can be hard to understand priorities, how priorities are being set, how information flows, how research interests are balanced, and the influence of power dynamics. As such, researchers can always figure out when they're supposed to engage, who to talk to, or how to frame their recommendations so they resonate. The final barrier that I'll mention is the challenge of scientific uncertainty. A good example is the effort to address nuisance algae in Lake Erie. Governments are under pressure to create policies that clean up the lake, but there's a whole set of reasons we don't know exactly what is causing the problem, and it's complicated by climate change and invasive species. Scientists don't want to be wrong, but the process of figuring this out is taking years, all the while water quality problems are getting worse. So what can we do to address these types of barriers? Well, I can't offer any magical solutions that fix the problems, but I'll offer 3 ideas to get us started. First, establish good relationships with your knowledge users. Relationships built on trust and that have mutually understood expectations. One tip is to set up meetings to talk to your collaborators one-on-one at the beginning of your project. Ask them what they want out of the project. How do they want to contribute? How often do they want to hear from you? Second, communicate early and communicate often. One common mistake is that researchers will wait until the end of the project to share their discoveries and recommendations. But this approach fails to recognize the value that partners can offer throughout the project, such as better understanding the context, which I talked about earlier. Communication strategies don't have to be complicated or too time-consuming. Even simple emails that encourage feedback or regular update meetings can work. And finally, meet your knowledge users where they're at. You don't always need to develop your own website or set up your own advisory committee. Instead, see if you can utilize existing meetings, tools, and processes to connect with your audience. Is there a webinar or podcast that you can present at? Are there government advisories that you can join, advisory committees? Can you offer a presentation at someone else's workshop? Not only can these strategies reduce your workload, but you can often reach a more extensive audience than you would if you relied on your own Rolodex. And I fully recognize that these take time and resources. But to do this well requires having someone dedicated to this work, someone who comes with a different perspective, a broad network, and context-based knowledge. And that's why I think academic institutions should invest in knowledge brokers, folks who specialize in finding the opportunities to align science and policy. So in summary, despite the barriers that limit academic engagement in policy, knowledge brokers can be key to leveraging windows of opportunity that maximize the impact of research. And this is critical if we're going to be able to figure out solutions that address wicked problems. So that's it. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you want to learn more about these ideas. Thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Andy Stirling, based at the University of Sussex in the UK, and it's a real privilege to be invited to give a talk to this session of the conference on relations between research, innovation, and democracy. And this is especially the case because without wanting to be too colourful about it, there's arguably never been a time before in history when the relations between evidence and democracy have been more in the limelight or more central to unfolding global politics. Many crucial open questions are raised, of course, by the continuing global COVID-19 crisis. There are many possible ways that are variously foreseen to pivot from this catastrophe to greater equality, improved ecological flourishing in the world, but there are also many ways in which pre-existing regressive forces are looking to turn this shock to their own advantage. So particular questions arise for research and innovation governance then, not only because these questions are focal for this conference session, but because arguably questions of democracy have been for so long neglected in the field of science and technology policy generally. Of course, this is not to say there's been no thinking about the relations with democracy. The relations between science, technology and democracy have seemed pretty clear-cut in the questions they raise about, for instance, which policies can be most rapid or effective in addressing agreed aims, how to scale up particular powerfully supported technologies to those ends, how to strike the right balance in regulating risks, how to recruit more scientists from excluded groups, how to build public trust. These are all very important, pressing challenges. But all the more important for being relatively neglected compared to these, I would argue, are some additional questions that typically remain virtually entirely unaddressed in research and innovation governance around the world. Questions like, what specific directions should be pursued for research in particular areas, like food or energy or water or information? The key issues are not just about how much of some particular technology to adopt, the risks to accept from it, but which kinds of technologies, which direction should innovation be steered in, how to prioritize support across different areas of science, not just about for or against funding for science, but how much to fund and support more widely different kinds of areas and applications of science, how to navigate uncertainties that defy scientific risk assessment, are much more overtly political in their nature, how to be more plural in attending to marginalized understandings and perspectives, how to ensure trustworthiness and accountability in the governance of science and technology, as much as public trust or expert responsibility that tend to be much more intensively discussed. So it can easily be missed how radical these kinds of questions can be in a world, for instance, where, as is the case at the moment, the largest single area of public funding for research and innovation around the world does remain military. And the main drivers of innovation pathways in health or food or water or energy do remain private profit, market dominance, rents on intellectual property, rather than the often more prominently stated goals, for instance, around sustainability. So questions over democracy and accountability in research and innovation are not trivial, because this is a world where it's not just essential that truth speaks to power in ways that this community has really championed so effectively, but also about society being more open about the many ways in which power shapes truth. The outcomes we get from research and innovation are partly driven by the politics that operate within and around research and innovation processes themselves. In other words, powerful interests, structures of privilege are operating within and around science itself, corporate, governmental, institutional, disciplinary. And these are not being scrutinized rigorously enough because science is counterposed with democracy rather than seeing these issues within science. And so what can happen then, inadvertently, of course, is that these interests and structures of privilege can operate behind the mask of scientific objectivity to deny the real levels of uncertainty and ambiguity, open-endedness about the ways in which research and innovation should go. And we're getting the strongest voices talking disproportionately loudly. So to see this as a problem then is not to imply that power is sometimes always a bad thing. It's just to apply the basic, uncontroversial principle at the core of democracy, which is that power is most likely to become a problem if it is left unchallenged. So it's in order to try to help to be more rigorous about these issues that many colleagues around the world are working with the UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, in an initiative called the Strings Project, which is an initiative to look at the steering of research and innovation towards the global goals, to help identify new tools and metrics and visualizations, to help build new platforms and networks for enhancing accountability about the directions taken by science and technology, and how developments in particular sectors can be helped to align more effectively with the human values in the SDGs. And in the process then, to help enable the more democratic steering of science and technology than is currently the case. And so a number of presentations at the conference will unpack some of the details of these efforts in the Strings project. But for now, thank you very much for letting me introduce some of those issues in this session.
Science, technology, and innovation plays an essential role for the sustainable development of modern societies. This may be achieved by connecting scientists and decision makers through immersive mechanisms, like Mexico City's Science Policy Interface Fellowship, a program led by the Ministry of Science and Technology of Mexico City. It consists in placing early career scientists in several agencies of the local government, where they can provide scientific evidence to officials for policy and decision making. This program represents the first effort of its kind in Latin America. As such, it also provided adequate training for the cohort.
Our work within ministries has implied collaborations with different kinds of professions, who enriches the working place. Our main function usually deals with information, reports, briefs, informs on state of the art, and so on. Thus, we try to help in the process of decision-making, and in this way, build bridges between science and politics. For those who are interested in this science-policy interface, we will recommend to open up to perspectives different from academia. Fortunately, there are many organizations who can help with this.
In times of crisis, such as the outbreak of COVID-19, we have provided scientific information to policymakers, initially to understand the problem, and when the information grew, to select this information and transmit it quickly and in a simple language. Also, we have promoted the link between local government and the scientists to work together. For example, for strengthening information systems for monitoring the COVID-19 outbreak in Mexico City. Currently, long-term work between the local government and scientists is beginning to be planned. Policymakers recognize the advantage of having internal scientific advice to plan programs and public policies. Some challenges that we have are to position scientific advice in the organizational structure and promote the participation of the scientific community in the science policy interface.
Program results for the ministries were highly positive. They gained a highly skilled collaborator with strong ties with academia, which allowed them to impulse research that had been highly overlooked. The fellows were able to interpret scientific literature to answer specific questions, creating hard evidence like policy briefs, technical opinions, guiding lines for speeches, and so on. But they were also able to translate questions that seem hard or impossible to answer into ones that can be informed by scientific knowledge. For the participants, the program was also highly beneficial. As of today, only Daniel and Monica remain as science policy fellows. Vicente is working as a parliamentary researcher in science, technology, and innovation topics. Aline is working as a full-time professor. And all four fellows are part of the program of Science, Technology, and Policy of the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research. Last but not least, Adriana and Beatriz are working as postdocs.
Politics need science, and science need politics. As scientists, we need to strengthen our tools for communicating to policymakers. One option is to use this kind of training programs on science, technology, and innovation policy. In 2018, this program required a lot of political will, objectivity, foresight, and innovative ideas on the decision-making processes. As pioneers on these kind of projects in Mexico and the Latin American region, we have decided to create a new NGO, the Mexican Association for the Advancement of Science, AMEXAC, with the objective to amplify efforts to provide new careers options for young scientists. AMEXAC will contribute to strengthening the connection between science and politics and ultimately to the society welfare.
Hi, my name is Aline Hayter. I'm Senior Program Specialist at INASP. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really highlighted the role of science advisory systems in policymaking and demonstrated the real complexity of the relationships between different actors in each country knowledge system. Today, we'd like to share some of the approaches that we've used in the SETI program, Strengthening Evidence for Development Impact, to really help us understand capacity for evidence use in context. SETI is aiming to strengthen the use of evidence in policy in Ghana, Uganda, and Pakistan, working in partnership with country governments and through a consortium with 3 country lead partners and a group of international and regional support partners. INASP is the technical lead of the capacity development work stream in SETI, and that's one of 2 technical work streams in the project. So SETI's approach to capacity development really aims to understand capacity for evidence use in context, so in its organizational context and in its broader political economy context. So we are really interested in the formal and informal, the visible and invisible factors that affect evidence use. And we know that those are found both within the organizations that we're working with in SETI and in the broader environment. The first and the most foundational step for SETI in understanding evidence issues in context was to conduct a political economy analysis. And those were conducted by the country leads in each of SETI's focus countries, Ghana, Uganda, and Pakistan. And as part of those analyses, we started to look at the initial organizational entry points where the program could work. So we used the Harvard Building State Capability approach, the AAA approach, and adapted that to give us an initial light touch sense of potential government partnerships that we could start to nurture through SETI. That gave us enough of an idea of where there was existing interest and momentum and buy-in to collaborate in order to select agencies that we could then work together with on a more in-depth evidence diagnostic. So those in-depth evidence diagnostics kind of supported the overall move in the consortium from sort of thinking politically into sort of working politically. And they started in the inception phase of the program and focused on co-identifying the problems, the root problems within organizations that are affecting evidence use, and co-identifying the solutions that SETI and the government partners could work on together to try and address those problems. So in the early days of SETI, for us, it has been really useful, these key components. So starting with a political economy analysis, moving through using a AAA analysis to kind of identify early emerging entry points, and then building on that for a more nuanced and comprehensive evidence diagnostic with those government partners. That was a really useful sequence for us to kind of support an overall move from thinking into working politically, and to make sure that as we started the implementation of the program, we were grounding those implementation decisions on a really solid understanding both of the political economy context and of the particular organizational contexts and needs and priorities of those organizations that the project was going to be partnering with for a number of years. You know, SETI understood that to be an adaptive and agile program that could respond to the political realities that had been outlined by the political economy analysis, we knew that we needed to ground our interventions very much in a co-identification of where the problems lay and what the potential solutions were. So it was really important to us that we could work closely with government partners to understand where the root problems were, and from that point to develop solutions. So we wanted to avoid being solution-led, and we did really want to take the time to understand where the key issues were and where our best collective effort could be targeted to improve evidence use as well. This kind of focus on context and on understanding the organizational context for evidence use, and trying to understand what it feels like within those policy-making bodies and what the factors are that affect how evidence is used by those bodies. It's really part of our focus on the demand side of evidence-informed policy-making, and that's something that we've been working on and learning about for a long time, and that we are looking forward to working on more closely with our partners in SEDI. So it's really a key part of understanding the demand side, is seeing that capacity in context within the government organisation as well as within the broader political environment. So to hear more about this work in SEDI as a whole or within any of the focus countries, please do reach out to any of the consortium partners who were involved in the programme.
New Horizon for Data-Driven Science for Policy, a proposed system to generate robust scientific evidence. A critical challenge for science policy decision makers is determining how to spend limited resources most productively. To do so, one must have a basic understanding of the inner workings of the science, technology, and innovation system, knowledge of where the most productive research and development activities are being conducted, and an awareness of how progress proceeds across numerous individuals and institutions. Our objective is to establish a STA data platform across the sectors to effectively gather, analyze, and disseminate the data among the practitioners operating at the interface of science and policy. The proposed system will interlink the existing STA data silos, systems of state institutions and corporations in Sri Lanka to bring them into a common platform to be explored within a framework. In line with this, initially, the data is statistical sources of national R&D, science technology management information systems of National Science Foundation, Ministry of Vocational Training and Skill Developments, Innovations and Research Coordinating Secretaries, Science Technology Innovation Dashboard, National Science and Technology Commissions, Annual S&T Review Data Collection and Review and Tools, National Intellectual Property Office, University Grant Commission's relevant data sources will be linked to a common platform. Subsequently, cross-reference validation verification would be done under the collaborative purview of the Department of Census and the Department of National Planning and National Science and Technology Commission. The centralized system intended to generate high quality, high coverage data sets to provide robust evidence by rigorous analysis to report the national STA status of the country, to enable data-driven decision-making and ultimately strengthen the science advice ecosystem of the country. Further, the system would open avenues for advanced data mining and modeling tools to be made available for the policy actors. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Timo Maas. I am a policy researcher at PBL, Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency. We are the Dutch Governmental Research Institute for Environmental Policy Analysis. And institutes like PBL are dedicated to policy and societal impact. Nobody seems to question that this impact exists. But at the same time, we find that in practice, insight into this impact is often quite limited. How much impact is there? What kind of impact is there? And how is it achieved? And these questions are important because they contain opportunities to learn about impact, to improve the work that we do, both in terms of effectiveness, increasing that effectiveness, but also about being transparent and about being accountable for the role that we have in the democratic policy process. So for this reason, we have developed a methodology to increase insight in our impact with 3 aims: to help individual researchers increase their impact skills, for the organization to learn more about the impact that we have and to integrate these into the organizational strategy. And in terms of public accountability, we think our method can provide input to the regular external evaluations of PBL. Our methodology consists of developing impact narratives for individual research projects. And these impact narratives detail what impact is desired, for what reason by the project, what pathways it deployed to realize this impact, and to what extent it is plausible that this impact was successfully realized. These impact narratives consist of a theory of change that makes explicit the logic by which a project is organized, the social network of the project staff, what interactions did they have with what stakeholders that can have contributed to achieving impact, a media analysis, to what extent did results gain attention in media, and can that be compared to the theory of change as well. And the fourth and final element of our methodology is the perspective of external stakeholders. How do they perceive the project's value, and what could we have done better? The aim of this methodology is to analyze several key projects at PBL every year to build a library of impact narratives. And to give just one example of how we have tested this methodology so far, PBL publishes Spatial Outlook every couple of years, which aims to inform policymakers working in the field of spatial planning. The 2019 version really aimed to help policymakers deal with long-term uncertainty in their work. And the team reasons that this required a change in mindset rather than just informing them about sort of possible changes in the future. And that this change in mindset was not so easily created or achieved with a report, but it required something different. So for this reason, they set up a road trip and they held workshops throughout the country at different levels of government, different groups of policymakers, to actually rehearse the future with them, to have an experience in which they could practice and do working with uncertainty. At the same time, the method that we have developed can be quite time-consuming, we realize. So we're looking into different ways in which we can integrate it into the organization as well. We have developed a guide, a series of questions that can help individual project teams to think about the impact that they want to have, to think about their own impact narrative sort of ahead of doing the project. We have developed an internal training to help staff more generally grapple with that, to grapple with these questions, and to operationalize impact within their own work. Finally, we see that there's a number of overarching insights, a number of questions that emerge while developing this methodology, while testing it internally. So first of all, we think a methodology can really help to chart the diversity of projects at PBL. We can have quite different roles, sometimes very much forward-looking, sometimes much more evaluatory, looking at whether policy worked and what made it work or didn't. And these different roles also probably require different impact strategies. So we're trying to learn about what works in what situation. We're also hoping that our methodology can help to stimulate a conversation about good impact in the Institute. So the guide with the questions can help project teams think about what is desirable impact for their project, and maybe also discuss this with the management or with external stakeholders even. Finally, our methodology focuses on individual projects. But we realize that there's a tension between the object of study that you choose. And we want to avoid falling into a trap of seeing impact as the individual merit of a project or of a project team. And we realize that really impact is also about a series of projects or a group of projects on a longer term, and institutional factors themselves. This is only one tool, and we're trying to train the impact muscle of the Institute in this way. So to conclude, we're not only learning about our own impact, we're also learning about the strengths and weaknesses of this methodology that we have developed. And we'd be very happy to exchange further ideas and lessons with anyone interested. Thank you very much.
And this brings us to the end of 3 series of Innovation in Science Advice. We discussed new models, mechanisms, the engagement of science diplomacy, and the necessity for theory and practice to go hand in hand and building capacity for future. I want to thank you for being with us during the last 3 days and hope you stay engaged in some way with INGSA for more of these discussions. I would also like to invite you to the 13th Canadian Science Policy Conference happening virtually online from November 8th to 26th of 2021 for 3 weeks of programming, where we will discuss many of these topics plus many more. Thank you and look forward to connect with you in future.